Hey, how's it going, everyone? I just got back from a really long run, so I'm out of breath, and I thought that would be the perfect time to film this video. What would 100 shares of Visa look like? A dividend investing strategy. So first things first, I like to look at the overall picture and numbers. Now, when it comes to Visa, yes, their dividend yield is less than 1%. However, the company has been growing that dividend payout by 15% year over year, and the dividend payout ratio is 23%. So that tells me that it's really healthy, sustainable, and that the company feels like the dividend yield is too low, and that's why they're growing it by double digits, because they have the cash and the means to do so. So for every share of Visa that you own, the annual dividend payout is $2.08, and the dividend distribution schedule is every 3 months. So back in 2014, each share of Visa paid out a 10-cent dividend. However, as we fast forward throughout the years, now each share of Visa that you own gives you 52 cents in dividends. That's an increase of over 500% in about 10 years. And when we look at their free cash flow, it's the exact same picture. Back in 2010, Visa generated $2.4 billion of free cash flow. And as we fast forward throughout the years, now we're looking at $19.6 billion of free cash flow, which, mind you, from the year prior, it grew by 10%. And as an investor, I love to see double-digit growth in almost every category and metrics. And by the way, if you want a more thorough analysis on the numbers and intangibles, then watch my deep dive on Visa. Alright, so how much would this experiment cost? So we're going to play with 100 shares of Visa. 100 times $273, which is what they're currently trading for, would result in $27,000. So that is how much it would cost up front. And just in case you forgot about how small Visa's dividend yield is, there's your reminder, 0.76%. So when we think about how much this experiment would cost, $27,000, that's about the same price of living large. I'm talking about eating Kobe beef for you and your wife every other day for an entire year, or just eating out very frequently. Funny story, one time I actually had a roommate that I loved. He was the absolute best. He used to eat out 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, every single month. And when we look at the total cost of this experiment of $27,000, that would be $75 a day on eating out. And I can't blame him, because there's people out here who spend their money getting their buttholes bleached, which I didn't even know was a thing. So if eating out makes you happy, then by all means, go ahead. But if you want to bleach your butthole and do weird, unnecessary cosmetic procedures, I don't know about that one. But I guess if it makes you happy, then so be it. So to figure out the numbers that I'm going to punch into the formula and assumptions, we need to look at their history, right? So for the past roughly 10 years or so, the annualized rate of return, which is the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate, meaning how much your money would have grown every single year, for Visa, that's 17%. And when we compare that to VU, which is the S&P 500, well, their CAGR was 12.5%. And by the way, I like to compare potential investments to the market, because if the company stock cannot beat the market, then you might as well stick to the market. I know, that's silly logic, but that's just what I believe in. Now here's where it gets interesting and surprising, because when I compare Visa to their competitor, Mastercard, the same time frame and timeline, well, it does in fact look like Mastercard has had a better growth history, because an initial $10,000 invested into Visa and Mastercard and reinvesting those dividends, in that 10-year timeline, Visa's would have grown to $44,000, but for Mastercard, it would have been $55,000. Mastercard's CAGR is 19.8%, which is slightly better than Visa, but the numbers right here, it seems more drastic. All right, so now that we understand the historical performance and the numbers, the actual numbers, here are the assumptions that we are going to plug into the formula. We want to play it safe and be a little conservative. So we're going to make the assumption that the stock price is going to grow by 9% year over year for the next 20 years. And for the dividend growth rate, I know it's sitting at 15%, but we're going to shave 6% off of that and plug in 9% into the equation. And we're not going to put any more external money into the portfolio, meaning the dividends that Visa pays out will be utilized to buy more shares. With that said, so what happens after 20 years of having 100 shares of Visa? In the first year, those 100 shares of Visa will pay out a dividend of $207. And as we fast forward throughout the years, at the start of year 20, the annual dividend payout should be around 12 $1,200. But at the end of 20 years, then the annual dividend payout is $1,300. The final portfolio valuation is $175,000, and the total return is 540%. Before you think that's a big number, stick with me. And by the way, as you see these numbers, I agree with you. It's pretty underwhelming. I feel the same way you do, because the annual dividend income after 20 years, only $1,300? That's kind of low. But remember, you buy Visa stock for the growth, and that's why Visa falls under dividend growth investing. The dividend that they pay is just the cherry on top of your hairy shoulders. And with the spirit of change in mind, let's go ahead and look at the portfolio valuation and how it changes over the years. So in year one, of course, $27,000, our initial cost. However, look at the end of year 10. It becomes $69,000. And by the end of year 15, that initial $27,000 should grow to $110,000. And then, of course, at the end of year 20, $175,000. That's the power of dividends compounding, aka the snowball effect. Speaking of snowball effect, here's a two dads joke for you. What do you get when you cross a snowman and a vampire? Do you give up? Well, the answer is frostbite. Ba-dum-ts. And maybe we'll feel a little bit better about the numbers if we look at them side to side as a comparison, right? So in the beginning, we have 100 shares, and by the end, we'll have 114 shares from the dividends being reinvested to buy more shares. This is also very underwhelming. However, the stock price goes from $273 a share all the way up to $1,500 a share. More likely than not, if the valuation of Visa stock goes up to this number, they probably will do a stock split and it'll be like a 5-for-1. My prediction, if this ever happens. But you know what? I'm not satisfied with the results. So let's go ahead and dig a little deeper behind the numbers. But first, we have to figure out, when did Visa become publicly traded? Did you know that Visa became a stock on the stock market on March 2008? Which is kind of sad because the following year, it was the Great Recession. So their timing was a little wonky, but in the grand scheme of things, it all worked out. So Visa has only been publicly traded for 16 years. Let's keep that in mind. I remember when I was 16, I couldn't wait until I could become a grown-up and leave my hometown. At that point in my life, I was sick of high school and sick of the people that I grew up with. I think it's a phase that some teenagers go through. Now that I'm an old fart, I look back and I realize I took it for granted how simple life was for me when I was 16 or even 17. Because as an adult, our life is filled with daily chaos and stresses from our obligations. But you know what? With adult money, we can fund our hobbies. And my confession to you is that these days, I've been really getting into board games. I'm talking about watching a lot of board game YouTube and doing a lot of research about the best tabletop board games. And I don't know if it's weird or not, but I actually enjoy watching random 3 to 5 people play a board game together. The only problem is, I don't have any friends in real life near me to play with. So I guess that's why I see the appeal behind the mukbang section of YouTube, because there's people that watch other people eat, because I'm thinking maybe it's because they're eating by themselves and they're also feeling kind of alone, but to watch someone else eat with them feels like there's a companion or a friend. So I don't know, I resonate with it. But anyhow, to get back on topic, when we look at the actual data and the total return for Visa, well, it paints a different story. So remember, Visa has only been publicly traded for the past 16 years. But in that 16-year time frame, Visa has returned 2,000%. That is their total return. So when we look at our experiment for the next 20 years yielding 540%, that's really low. And I know, I get it. Past performance is not indicative of future gains. Meaning, just because Visa grew by 2,000% in 16 years, it does not mean that they're going to grow another 2,000% for the next 16 years. However, I feel like we're being too cynical. It reminds me of that one time I thought I had no chance with the most beautiful, kind, and patient person I have ever seen in my life. 10 years later, we're married, and now they do my manicures because they want me to feel cared for. Lucky for my partner, I don't care what people think of me, so I let them paint my fingernails whatever color they want. And on multiple occasions, guys have hit on me because of my painted fingernails. I think it gives a particular vibe and energy. But I'm not a douche, so I let them down easy and with a laugh by confessing to them that I have a micro penis and I have 3 nipples and I smell really bad. It usually does the trick and they leave me alone. Speaking of which, if I had 3 nipples, I kid you not, I would get all 3 nipples pierced and then connect it all with a chain. And then if I was feeling feisty, I would get my belly button pierced and connect that chain to the belly button as well. So with that said, what if we ran the experiment with optimistic numbers that we see today? Remember those double-digit numbers? Now, Visa's 15-year CAGR is 21.8%. And when we look at their 10-year CAGR, well, then it's 18.7%. And despite seeing the actual historic numbers for Visa, we're going to go ahead and plug in 15% as their annual share appreciation rate, meaning that the stock price is going to go up by 15% year over year. And for their dividend growth rate to be 15.3% to accurately portray what the numbers are right now. Now, if we were to do that, this is what we would see. The ending balance, the portfolio would be worth $500,000 from that initial $27,000, which means that the total return would be 1,700%. And before you say that's wild and ridiculous, if I go back a few slides, you can see that for the past 16 years, the stock price has grown by 2,000%. So for you to tell me that 1,700% is out of the picture and too much going forward, I think you're being the cynical one here, Buster. Now, if Visa is able to sustain their dividend growing at a rate of 15% year over year, well then at the end of 20 years, that annual dividend income would be $4,100, which sounds a whole lot better than the $1,300 that we heard earlier. So if these numbers are too optimistic and the numbers that we used earlier were too cynical, then what are we going to do? Well, I think what's actually going to happen, the most likely scenario for the next 20 years, is probably an average of the two. And so if we average both of those portfolio experiments, then the final portfolio valuation should be around $340,000, and the annual dividend payout should be around $2,700. And here's a fair warning, we're about to take this bus and drive it off the cliff. Speaking of 20 years, time just flies by, doesn't it? When I was young and immature, circling back to what I talked about earlier, how I just wanted to grow up, during that exact same time frame, as a young teenager, I thought life was very long and drawn out. But the older that I get, the more I realize I need to appreciate the present moment. I don't know if you can relate to me on that, but I feel like I always lived my life in anticipation for the next big thing or metric. I practiced delayed gratification too hard, or I guess too closely. And it feels weird because I used to say silly things like, I'll start living my life once I get my degree, and then it turned into the next degree, and then again and again. Or I used to say things like, I'll start living my life once I get that promotion. And then once I got that promotion, it was the next thing. Like I put my eyes on the prize of I need to get that promotion in the next 2 years. And funny enough, when I used to be depressed, it was as simple as I'll start living my life once I get my Amazon package. And what's funny is whatever was inside of that box, it provided a dopamine hit for like the 20 minutes afterwards, but then just went away. And the list goes on and on. I always have this checklist of what I need in order to start living my life. It's a never-ending cycle of making excuses of when I'll actually get to start living life. However, now I just appreciate what I've got going for me, and I understand that life will never be perfect for any opportunity or any occasion. So my message to you is the best time to start living life is now. Just a life lesson that I reflected on recently that just really hit me hard. And even if you feel like your life sucks right now, just keep your head up, man, because eventually the storm that you're going through is going to pass. And then hopefully you can start living your life. And if you don't believe me, go to Texas Roadhouse and order a meal to go. I don't care what you get, country fried steak or a 16-ounce sirloin, get whatever you need to. and then go home, get cozy on the couch or the bed or on the floor or in the bathroom if you're a little freak like that, and watch The Lord of the Rings, have a marathon from start to finish while eating your food. Because I'll tell you what, little moments like that I would label as a good life. And if you want a movie that'll tug at your ballsack, then watch a movie titled A Man Called Otto. And if I can make another recommendation to you, you should watch that movie while eating a box of Domino's pizza. I promise you'll feel better. So with that said, that is the results of what 100 shares of Visa would look like in a cynical case and in an optimistic case. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you next time, my friend. Dividend Compounders with Cheese, signing out. Stay safe.